Hasta aquí hemos llegado. El programa donde la política y la economía de Estados Unidos se analizan sin filtros y con los expertos que mejor conocen la realidad. María Herrera, Mellado y Willie Lora te traen cada semana un espacio de debate con invitados de alto nivel, analistas, economistas, políticos y periodistas que te darán las claves de lo que realmente está pasando. Síguenos en las redes sociales de Gateway Hispanic y únete a la conversación. Hasta aquí hemos llegado. Información, análisis y debate sin censura. No te lo pierdas.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us another week in our new episode of Hasta aquí, hemos llegado of Gateway Hispanic. Today, I'm again joined by my colleague, Willie Lora, who is in Miami again. Welcome,
Yes,
Willie.
I'm here. I'm still here. I'm going to be traveling soon, but I'm still here.
Good
to be
good.
Here, Maria.
I'm very happy to have you in this show again, Willie. And we are honored to have two international guests who are geopolitical analysts and experts on what's going on in South America, but also the influence of China on the region and the decline of European institutions and entities who continue to persecute conservatives and influencers around the world. That is the latest. They're going to be even investigating in U.S. courts. They're throwing the IRS dogs all over everybody. So it's really horrible what's happening in Europe, Willie.
Yes, the advance of the left and the region. Obviously, you're from Spain. You know what the consequences has been. And part of the problem is, like, for so many years we didn't have a coherent strategy towards the region, and I believe the new administration is trying to do the work. We've seen Secretary of State Marco Rubio making some really strong statements about that issue, and the fact that his first trip to the foreign trip was Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean, and now he's going back to Mexico City to talk to the president of Mexico. I think that there's a real engagement this time with this administration towards the region, and hopes that they can do that kind of weight with China. They've been in the region for so long, and they've been working really hard to try to gain that space because we didn't have a coherent policy towards the region. So let's see what our expert says about that. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. So we have Steve Hecht, who is originally from New York, but currently lives in Guatemala. And hi, Steve.
Hi, Maria. Hi, Willie. Great to be with you.
Hi, Steve.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. We met last time in Wisconsin, right, Steve, at the RNC convention.
That's right. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and Steve put together a conference. It was a great conference, Willie, on the influence of the U.S. government at the time, the Biden administration, and the terrible effects that administration had on democracy in the region. We're going to talk about that with Steve, but we also have Fergus Hodgson, who is from New Zealand, but last time I heard he was living in Colorado, right, Fergus?
It's true, Maria. That's right. I used to live in Guatemala and before that, Argentina.
Great. Thank you so much, Fergus. You're an economist and also a geopolitical analyst. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. We're a big fan of the Impunity Observer. That's where you guys are usually write topics that are really, really important to our Hispanic community. And we try to reproduce your articles, and Steve has accepted to be included in Gateway Hispanic because we're growing and the Hispanic community seems to be waking up, really. The latest poll showed that over 50% of Hispanics, I will say even 62% of Hispanics continue to support President Trump despite the anti-Trump rhetoric, the use of the media to basically destroy this country and put Hispanic against the rest of the population. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'd love to take that question. Oh, go, Willie.
No. I was just gonna. No, that's fine. I was just gonna say really quickly that the point that Maria is making, it was basically confirmed by the poll this week that says that the U.S. More than half of it, I think it's 52%, believe that the country is going in the right direction, despite whatever you hear in the media.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Fergus.
Yes, so there are two important points regarding Trump's success with Hispanics. One, he's shown that Hispanics are not necessarily against law enforcement when it comes to illegal immigration. In fact, That's a misunderstanding. Many of them are strongly in favor of enforcement of immigration laws. Second, if you provide Hispanics with opportunities to rise into the middle class and grow financially, they will vote more conservative and Republican, knowing that they do not want to be, paying for a welfare state.
I agree. Steve, what's your intake on that?
Yes, I agree with all that. And I would add that those statistics are understated. You've got to factor in the demonization of Trump, which has been ongoing for 10 years, ever since he announced for president in 2015. And the only thing that the Democrats had to run on last time was demonization of Trump. They offered absolutely nothing, zero. And their demonization has been successful. And in spite of that, he has these approval ratings. And that's because of the miserable record that the Democrats had during the Biden regime.
I agree. Steve, you wrote a piece of news discussing what the U.S. should be doing right now in Guatemala and the entire region to basically try to balance things out, because when Biden was in office, when Obama was in office, they really destroyed nations like Guatemala, Colombia. They partnered up with Venezuela, with Cuba. What do you think?
Well, they did that on purpose, as you know, because we talk about this all the time, and you report on various places, and you being also from Spain, they are united. It's a globalist movement of centralization and abuse of power, and if they have a need for something in Colombia, it happens. If they need it in Spain, it happens. If they need it in Guatemala, it happens. We, on the other hand, don't have an international organization. Each one of us has a specialty in a particular country, and sometimes some of us know things about other countries, but we don't coordinate anywhere like how they coordinate. So we're all kind of on our own in our own regions. And of course, the key region is the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask both of you, Fergus and Steve. It was the first time, and I covered the region for many, many years, that we saw that embassy was actually became in opposition in Guatemala and created, in finances to SEC, it was an organization that was basically going after the opposition, funded by a whole bunch of NGOs. Was that actually the drop that actually overcome what we call the glass of water? It was basically the tip of the iceberg when that was announced, and obviously then it was thrown out. But it was a direct opposition to the government that the U.S. embassy in Guatemala. Fergus,
Say that last part again.
That the U.S. embassy in Guatemala was, the U.S. embassy in Guatemala became a front opposition to the government during the Obama administration, the Biden administration, financing through NGOs a harsh opposition to people that wanted to do the work and actually sustain democracy in the region.
Well, I would put it a different way. That as I wrote, I think Maria's referring to my piece published yesterday, and what I wrote there was that the subversives that attacked Guatemala in what they call the internal armed conflict, they were unable to overthrow the government by force, and they changed their strategy to overthrow the government by internal subversion, to take it over. And the State Department has, since longer than I've been alive, the State Department has been running its own foreign policy. And so the State Department was helping the former guerrillas under Bill Clinton. That's when.
Oh, we lost Steve.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Fergus. We lost.
I can take that one. So there's actually excellent research from an economist at UFM, Francisco Marroquin University in Guatemala City, and he's put out a paper which was supposed to come out before the election, but just came out after. Foreign aid and ideological hobby. And the challenge is that many of the progressives in the US State Department have, let's say, a broader view of democracy, that they don't think it's just the will of the people or the representation of the will of the people, but rather certain progressive entitlements or civil rights, and they would include things like the LGBT agenda, which obviously run afoul of the Guatemalan populace. So inherently, they're in conflict with what the Guatemalan people want. And but what Steve is referring to is actual funding, now not necessarily openly, but of groups that are violent, not necessarily shooting people, but shutting down roads or impeding access to buildings to disrupt the accountability process.
I agree. Fergus, I have a question for you. So you often discuss also the influence of China in the region. And
Yes.
Willie was mentioning how come the U.S. is pouring millions of dollars into South America and Europe, whereas China doesn't, but still the influence of China is growing per day. Is that due to bribes to foreign corrupt politicians? And what can we do about it? Do you think the U.S. is doing enough challenging the control over the Panama Canal and sending Marco Rubio to Mexico and trying to sanction foreign companies and entities, even to the point where they're forbidding foreign companies to do business with rivals like Russia and China, etc.?
Yeah, wonderful question, and so important, Maria, because it's almost the elephant in the room, the biggest topic or most important topic right now in Latin America, that just ever so persistently and slowly, China has upped its trade with Latin America and is now more so in South America than Central America, but now has become the largest trading partner with the majority of nations in Latin America. So this is a huge sea change over the last 25 years, when previously it would have been unthinkable that China would have had more trade with Latin American nations than the United States, even in a place like Panama. Now, this is particularly acute in Central America, where there are such deep historic ties to the United States, and there's more, let's say, low-hanging fruit for the United States to reverse this course. And so there are two ways to go about it, I guess, the carrot and the stick. One is to sanction nations and corner them basically into choosing whether to be with the United States or with China. And in my opinion, most of them will eventually choose the United States for trade. And the carrot would be to make favorable policies, or what we call nearshoring opportunities, especially with the likes of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, right, where they're just so eager for opportunity. And like I said, they have such close historic ties with the United States.
Fergus, has it been a lack of a coherent policy towards the region that China has been able to gain so much territory on that part of the world? Or is it the fact that knowing the level of corruption of politicians in those countries have allowed China to gain that space? Because to be honest, and you know this issue very well, the U.S. actually has AIDS packages for around do that. China do loans that usually come attached to, you have to bring Chinese citizens to do it. They pay you $1 and dimes, that sort of thing. So is it a lot to do with the corruption that has been in place for so many years, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, absolutely. So Willie, I forgot to respond to Maria on that point. Yes, it is clear that Chinese investment does have a deleterious effect on the institutions of a nation. This is well established now. And it's kind of an irony almost that there's a lack of transparency, but it's almost like transparently not transparent, right? So there was a Chinese police station found functioning in Ecuador, covered as a travel agency, right? It's so bizarre. It's like a spy novel, but they had both an agency working out of a hotel and with a travel agency front. And so this was basically a money laundering scheme, an operation to keep money in the country, to keep it out of surveillance. So I do agree that corruption is a major problem, but it's not just the fact that the Chinese might be disinterested in accountability or transparency. It's that we have such an established network of terrorists, organized criminals in Latin America who are embedded in the political system. And so they have, let's say a welcoming party in the Chinese who are willing to work with them.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate. Fergus, this week we heard news that Elon Musk is stepping down from U.S. government, right? As an advisor. He's going back to his job. And some representatives are saying that despite all the investigation and fraud that has been found, the U.S. Congress has done nothing. Hasn't investigated more people. There haven't been charges filed against the people committing fraud, and we're used to see this level of corruption and fraud in South America, in Africa, in Asia, but we never imagined that was happening right in front of our eyes, right in the U.S. government. What do you think about what can happen next? What should, as U.S. citizens, demand of our representatives in Congress for this to never, ever happen again?
Oh, gosh, you really break my heart, because I'm so concerned about this fact that we have a real problem in the United States. And you mentioned this before, Willie, let's say the lack of ideological clarity or unity, this pride in the United States that it is a nation that stands for free enterprise, limited government, decentralization, individual rights. And I wish all Americans believe that, but obviously they don't. Absolutely. And we also have a portion of the Republican Party in the US Congress that is just, they're like big government, right? We could call them corrupt, or we could just call them rhinos, whatever you want to call them. And so we have this war within the Republican Party between, let's say, the America First or MAGA faction and then the Rhino faction or the Beltway faction. And it's a real hurdle, a challenge for both President Trump and I think Elon Musk basically is a little bit, maybe I would imagine he's sad also, that he feels like he's come up with all this opportunity, low hanging fruit, all these things that if you were to cut them, maybe even majority of Democrats would support cutting these programs. Because foreign aid especially is one of those areas where Americans are not excited about it being misused. They realize the country is in a grave fiscal crisis or a difficult position. We cannot afford to be wasting money all around the world. And so there is low-hanging fruit. What can U.S. citizens do? I think that the real opportunity is for a primary to remove the Republican representatives, and there are Democrats who would be moderate on these issues as well, who would be interested in accountability in the foreign aid sphere.
Absolutely, that's a great point. Steve, can you hear us? No, I don't think. Can you hear us, Steve?
We're still getting Steve to hear.
Oh man,
yeah, I think he actually signed on the same time back in. I think he needs to work with his settings to get him back in. But Fergus is so savage. Hopefully we'll get him back. You made an excellent point, and we talked about this before the interview. It's just you try to figure out. Elon Musk did a tremendous job. Actually, he deserves the Medal of Freedom that has been given at the White House to a lot of people who haven't done anything. At least he was able to put the spotlight on how much corruption the government is been moving money here and there for many, many years. And two things needs to happen. Legislation needs to happen to make those money that they were found, put it back into the Treasury, and prosecutions needs to happen. Some people need to be referred to the DOJ for prosecution. It's not an easy task. It's going to take a little bit of time because there's so many people involved, but it needs to happen. Otherwise, how are we going to gain credibility again as a parliament? People, they were trusted with the money that we pay in taxes every year. So I think there's a big challenge here for the Congress to actually take on. But as you say, the divisions within the Republican Party still there. Democrats are in another universe altogether. Yeah.
No, so it's a real challenge. And his name escapes me right now, but there's a wonderful book from a USAID whistleblower called Masters of Corruption, and I encourage everyone to read that one. It'll open your eyes to how he basically was trying to make known the misuse of funds, irresponsible activities abroad, and he was the one who got fired.
Yeah.
So,
I remember.
Yeah. So that's why I'm very, let's say, in favor of a real cleaning of the house and as much, let's say, underlying reform as possible rather than piecemeal changes, right? Yeah. Because And I will admit, I mean, I know people who work in these agencies, and one of them said that even the Dodge work, which I agree has been commendable, caused a lot of soul searching among those who work there.
Steve, can you hear us?
Yeah, I just heard you. I don't know what happened to this thing.
Welcome back. Welcome back.
Of all four of us, I'm the worst in terms of technology.
Steve, we were talking about Elon Musk's job at the White House, at the U.S. government. He's stepping down, and now there are a lot of people complaining that the U.S. Congress is not doing enough to investigate real fraud in the U.S. government. And also, you know, I asked Fergus, what do you think as U.S. citizens we should do now?
Okay. I would say this. I know we do what we can do, which is write and talk about it. I attribute that to that everything that you've seen so far is focused on one thing, getting the legislation passed. Trump has a huge problem, and that is the Democrat Party is controlled by crass manipulators who are experts in it, and they keep their people totally in line. And what they're trying to do is protect the federal bureaucracy at all costs. That's the key element to their subjugating the United States, just like they subjugate all the other countries that we talk about. And this is coming from inside the U.S. government. And so Trump is trying to do something about that. So he needs his legislative package, the thing he calls One Big Beautiful Bill. I wrote an op-ed about that 2 weeks ago. And everything that you saw with Doge, its basic objective was to reduce the estimates of government spending by cutting out all those programs. They were creating space, and they still have a big problem because the senators, Republican senators, are very concerned about deficit spending. Now, I mean, I don't believe in deficit spending, and we really need to correct it. But the overriding need at this moment is to beat the totalitarians that have taken control of the Democrat Party. And those totalitarians are part of a globalist movement is to take over the whole damn world if we let them do it. And so we need to, Trump needs to have this bill passed. So Doge was a cost-cutting mechanism. Now, it just so happens that Doge discovered the real subversive nature of USAID. And they're going to have to go into that. They're going to have to investigate it. And I suspect that all of that's going to happen once they have this bill behind them. And I hope they're successful making this bill, because if they're not, they have a real good chance of winning. And
we lost it again. Willie,
technology.
Let's move to Europe, right? This week we saw how the George Simeon, the candidate for the Romanian presidential election, submitted his complaint before the Constitutional Court of Justice in Romania. We also saw how the German authorities have to actually delabel the Alternative for Germany political party as extreme group. And people are kind of like challenging this movement that is trying to basically eliminate freedom of speech, political parties in Europe. And it seems like there is some resistance. Do you think there is hope for some European parties and some European citizens? Because as Steve was describing, this is like a group of people who are so well coordinated that I had the chance to speak to Steve about this in Wisconsin. They even, cross and they get to other parties before we do and label individuals and organizations as extremists, and they forbid them from entering the country and from participating in democratic elections. But there's some pushback. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they have two things they play really well, which is money, really well financed. We talked about the World Economic Forum, and they also control the media. You control the narrative, you control the money. So that the hap is happening a lot. But there's, like you said, there's a movement of change. We have Giorgia Meloni, who has actually done a really great job in Italy. And saying, talking, we have other countries that are after seeing what's going on with the European Parliament, which is crazy. I call it the cartel because it is a cartel. It doesn't represent the countries of Europe. It represents a very specific group of interest in the region. And they're, like I said, they're really well funded. They're going to try to stop everything, any movement that actually threaten their ability to control Europe the way they're doing it. And they're going to continue to do it. It's going to take effort. It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take the will of a lot of politicians on the right, the center right, to make the changes, and it needs to start with the European Parliament. That's where the biggest problem is. Look at what happened with the EU and the US in terms of the tariff negotiation. They were talking and they were going to get into an agreement, and then the European Union said, "No, we're not going to go. We're not going to do it. We're not paying attention." To the president got really pissed off and said, "Look, I'm just going to hit you with 50% tariff." So the next day, Von der Leyen was calling the president to try to figure it out, a way out of that mess. And what he's saying is, like, Europe needs to really think hard about the European Union. Do they going to really continue there, or are they going to do what the UK did and actually just get out of that and look to their own interests? Those are the big questions. But they're definitely well funded. They like I said, they control the narrative. And there's different groups, the center right, that will doing the right thing, and hopefully they'll succeed. That's the hope.
We usually we put this week, Fergus,
yes,
an article that we were covering Peter Bistrom, who is the German representative of the European Union, and he made a great speech at the European Parliament telling European politicians, why are you complaining about Trump? What you should be doing is caring and protecting European citizens like Trump does, with US citizens. And that's a great point. As Willie mentioned, European politicians have stopped caring and protecting European citizens. That's why people hate the European Union. We put out a couple of videos from Spanish farmers denouncing that, that they cannot even trade in the European Union, that they have to compete against African products and farmers. And we also cover another former representative from the Netherlands saying exactly the same thing. And he even traveled to Germany, Fergus, and he said, look, they destroyed the entire country. They put out these windmills. They all focus so much on these green deals and green energy that people don't even have green spaces to run and breathe fresh air. What is going on? How do you see Europe as a person from New Zealand, who's a country that has so much nature, but has also been hit by radical policies that is now trying to get rid of those two?
Yeah, so fundamentally, look, I mean, this, you're from Spain. In my opinion, the European Union is based on a fallacy that there's some kind of common ethnic and, let's say, values community of Europe, and there just is not. And I thought the European Union would learn from the Brexit campaign that they needed to amend their ways and become more of a hands-off, decentralized governing network, you might say, a coalition, but they have not. It's almost like they've become vindictive or doubled down. And I do see it as a grave problem. I'm an Irish citizen through my grandparents and would love to see Ireland basically exit the European Union and join with the British Isles, or more coherent alliance with the United Kingdom. So I'm like you, I'm gravely concerned that, let's say, the home of Western civilization is really struggling at this point, both economically and culturally. And I share that grave concern and would like to see more of these nations quit complaining and actually make credible moves towards exiting.
Willie, we were covering also the protests in Spain last weekend where they were like revolting. They say they don't want any more tourists, right? Like they're against tourism because it increases the rental prices and it's just like it's so full, it's so packed of people. But they don't do the same thing. They don't put the same energy challenging illegal and embedded immigration. So you see thousands of Muslim and African immigrants just arriving to Spain, and people are completely silent, and they're being housed in 5-star hotels. They are just receiving like here Medicaid and all this kind of social welfare. But when tourists come, the problem is like it's really hard to understand what's going on, because even this week, the former vice president of Spain, Irene Montero, she was calling for expropriation openly. She said that's fair, that's constitutional, and that's what needs to happen to kick out the hedge funds, the American hedge funds, because those are the ones buying Spanish property. So we're really crossing, like we're really like
it's becoming a big
our
problem.
way of life.
Yeah, it's looking at Colombia, kind of like the same things going in the same direction. But the issue with that we see in Europe is like, okay, we don't want tourists. So what do you produce? You know, because tourism is a big part of the economies of these countries. Obviously, the leftist agenda.
Spain, really, number one, because they make sure we don't have nuclear energy. They make sure we don't have innovation or research. We don't have anything else but tourism, because that's basically what the Spanish government did. And now they're like, the problem are the tourists, and especially U.S. hedge funds. But, you know, they won't. You see in Barcelona, Willie, I have colleagues. I'm an attorney, and my colleagues over there, they say they're moving to Andorra, they're moving to France, because they cannot continue, you know, they can't stand the level of violence the cartels are installing, the Muslim immigration, the expropriation, use of third-party properties is really sad to see that. But look at what happens to Macron this week.
He got slapped. I was saying, I don't know if he was forced, that actually he didn't say anything, because the excuse that he gave was laughable. It was completely laughable. It was a joke.
Was playing with his wife. He said his wife really didn't hit him, but we saw it.
His former teacher just smacked him up. It's like, shut up, you kid. He was so funny. You know, sometimes things like that, just laughed about it. But, you know, try to make an excuse to something that was so obvious was ridiculous.
But now, let me tell you something. If a man will have hit a woman, a president of a country, he will be in jail. He will. They will make a global campaign. Like we
have all the feminists on the streets in France and Italy, everywhere. Yeah. It's a well-funded, like Fergus was saying, it's a well-funded machinery. You know, they come together, which is something that unfortunately conservatives are not doing well in this country. But over there, and even in Latin America, you know, they come together. You know, it's a well-funded agenda machine. It's like, okay, we need to demonize the rich, and it's all socialism. You know, demonize the rich and make sure, like Travis says once in an interview, hey, you know, you don't understand the revolution. The revolution is about keeping people poor, but with hope. You know, they don't care about poor people. You know, they practice capitalism. They don't practice what they preach. So it's the same thing that is happening in Europe. And, you know, the Macron thing was just a funny show. But, you know, we laughed about it, but it's pretty serious. The guy has run the country. He gets slapped by his own teacher, now his wife. He's
first lady, the first lady. Fergus, you cover this week or the previous week what's happening in Canada. We have a video of a Venezuelan citizen saying, listen, this is already third world country. This is getting worse by the day. I want to exit Canada. The progressive policies, demonization of conservatives, and lack of freedoms in Canada is real. And you were writing about Quebec. Tell us a little bit about that.
So much is going on right now in Canada, Maria. It's really a historic time. And welcome back, Steve. But so I'm getting a little bit of echo there. Do you want to mute yourself? Anyway, but so basically Canada is structurally unsustainable. Canada has an equalization system and a reward system. Okay, Stevie.
Steve, can you mute your microphone because it has an echo? Just really quick.
Can I do what?
Can you mute your microphone just a little bit?
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, so Maria, I mean, and
no,
so I've got an article coming out tomorrow actually about the breakup of Canada is going to cause immense shockwaves across this continent and probably foment other separatist or independence movements, right? So fundamentally, Canada, like I said, is unsustainable. It is heading towards third world status. And I tell people, if you want to know the future of Canada, there are already parts of Canada that are in a terrible economic state. If you were to go to a place like Nova Scotia in the maritime provinces that are very poor, and most of the people have left, have been economically depressed for a generation or two. And so there is, in my opinion, a very good chance within about the next 5 years that Alberta will lead the way towards independence from Canada, and likely that will catalyze Saskatchewan also leaving and Quebec leaving. And so the Canada we know today, in my view, is really on borrowed time. And the good news for the United States is that an Alberta-Saskatchewan new nation potentially merged would be an incredible ally and a wonderful new trading partner.
It's horrible, Willie. Sometimes I have visited Canada and I see it's worse than Europe, you know?
Yeah,
the ghettos,
I used to go to Quebec a lot because I really love that region of the country. But at the same time, like Fergus was saying, it can't continue. It will collapse at some point soon. Economically, they're doing really bad. I remember that conversation that President Trump had in Mar-a-Lago, his first meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau, and Trudeau told them that, that they couldn't survive without the U.S. And that's when Trump said, well, then just become the 51 state and become the governor, which is true. We're sending so much money to Canada, and obviously we've seen the politics of it. And the new prime minister won the election because he used Trump to win the election, and Trump told him in his face that you won because of me. So Canada has a lot of challenges. I think economically they're not doing really well at all, and let's see what happens in a few years. I agree with Fergus. He's going to end up with, that's a big surprise, at the divided country. People will be doing the kind of, it will be the name, like some of these provinces live in Canada. What do you think, Steve? Let's bring Steve in.
Steve, let's talk about tariffs, right? We heard this week that there are some courts that are ruling that the tariffs imposed by Trump are unconstitutional, and that the Congress is the only one that is supposed to impose tariffs, and they're going to challenge everything. But Marco Rubio and the Secretary of Treasury, right, continue to argue that that's Trump prerogative, that the White House it's allowed to negotiate foreign policy. What is your opinion about that?
Well, this is pretty frustrating, right? Because the first time you asked me about Guatemala, then all of a sudden nobody's listening. And then you were talking about the European Union, and all of a sudden I'm not there anymore. So I really don't know how this works. But anyway, it all ties together. It's one movement. We're fighting one totalitarian movement that explains all of these things, that ties them all together. And unfortunately, not enough of us on the side of liberty understand this. And so what you're asking about in the United States is the judges are activist judges. They're not judges. They're political operatives. And they've been put there for that purpose. And it's the same thing in Europe. It's what we in the United States is the center of this, because we're talking a clash between the original concept of the United States, ruled by the people or ruled by the elites. Europe is completely in control. The elites control Europe completely. And the United States, that's what Trump represents. Are we going in the United States to get back ruled by the people, or are the elites going to finally subdue us? That's what it's all about. So what you're seeing with the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, I don't trust them. They've shown that they have a lack of courage. They had lack of courage in 2020, 2021, actually, when they refused to take the case of Texas versus Pennsylvania and 3 other states. They just simply refused to even consider the case. 2 justices said yes, but they needed 2 more to listen to the case. So now what these people are trying to do is say Trump doesn't control foreign policy. They did this in Guatemala, right? The high court, which was imposed by threats and bribery and all kinds of things, they controlled from 2016 to 2021 the high court in Guatemala, the court of last resort, the constitutional court. It told the president that he could not expel the Swedish ambassador. Now, it's pretty obvious in Guatemala, it's very obvious that the president controls foreign policy. He wants to expel an ambassador, no court has anything to do with that. Well, the same thing in the United States. And so we're looking at judges that are overstepping their bounds. And the question is, what will the Supreme Court do? And to me, they're not stepping up. And now, of course, they have all kinds of excuses because, as you know better than all of us, Maria, there's a process. So the Supreme Court has to wait till it gets there. I say there's something wrong, that there has to be a way to short circuit this stuff. And I certainly hope that the Supreme Court of the United States steps in. You were talking about Europe before. They hate Trump because Trump is an existential threat to that elitist control. So they're doing everything they can to defeat this guy. And what most people don't understand, it's not about helping the European people. It's not about protecting Europe per se, or any country in Europe. It's about protecting their authoritarian power. That's it. End of story. And in the United States, they are counting on the justice system in the United States to step in and misapply the Constitution and clip Trump's wings and not let him do what the U.S. Constitution permits him to do. And that's the key battle that we're watching. And we have to hope that the Supreme Court eventually does the right thing.
And you know, Willie, I was visiting Peru, Willie, last week, and I was shocked to see the Belgian embassy in Lima, in Peru, with the Belgian flag and the LGBT flag. And they were telling us, remember, from the Dominican Republic, that they were trying to kick all these foreign diplomats. But this is the influence that Steve is always denouncing. You know, the U.S. It started all this movement of putting Black Lives Matter flags, LGBT flags, and now all the Europeans are following, because that's how horrible it is, Steve. Everything that the U.S. does wrong, the European elites copy that and make it a movement. And as you say, it's a global movement. We can talk to Fergus about what's happening in Australia. It's really unrecognizable. Australia, I visited it, and it's like they also persecute conservative, and you're like a domestic terrorist. Talking about that, Willie, you wanted to see what FBI was doing to people who just didn't want to get vaccinated.
It's just what, like Steve was saying, it's a global movement. Like I mentioned before, it's well financed. They know exactly what they're doing. It's not that they're copying the U.S. Remember that the U.S. was funding this agenda throughout the hemisphere, through NGOs. It was billions and billions of dollars the USAID was using to fund that movement. It is not isolated. It's something that Trump became the problem. In other words, it's like, here comes this guy with,
and using citizens that are not awake, they're just woke, to put this agenda that hurt families, that destroy nations. And where are Europeans going to go after they destroy the entire European Union? Because that's what happened. And we can talk about South Africa, where the president of South Africa is justifying that the constitutional court, it says that kill the board, kill the farmer, it's freedom of expression. So I wonder, if men say kill women, kill all white women, will that be considered freedom of expression? Or will a white male or a male will go to jail for 50 years for becoming a terrorist? Because it's so unfair what we're seeing around the world. It's just like one small part of population is being persecuted just because they want to protect the rest of the civilization, but that's not true.
I remember that we saw the unclassified documents now that show how much the Biden FBI was labeling conservatives in the U.S. as a form of domestic terrorism. It's nothing new. You have to bring it to the stream so that people kind of pay attention. So everything for the left is taken to the stream. You don't agree with the regime, so you're a domestic terrorist. That's kind of like the thing. And going back to a point that Steve was making a minute ago regarding tariffs and how the judges and what's going on in the U.S. And correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but the way I see it is like there's an effort to make Trump make a mistake, using the court so that he can be impeached, because they have not been able to get rid of him in any other way. They understand that there's a division within the Republican Party. You have the rhinos and you have the Trump movement, and it is really weak on the House of Representatives. So if Trump makes the mistake to go against one of these courts, they can use that to impeach him and try to stop his agenda. I don't know if I'm too far out there, but that's kind of the way I see it. Because why is it that the Supreme Court have not used one of these cases that have come in front of them and said, look, this got to stop, you guys, or either the Congress needs to get engaged and legislate to kind of show the power that these judges have in order to stop the executive power.
Yeah, I would put it this way. They don't care anything about the law. They will impeach Trump like they did last time, with no evidence, no law, no nothing. If you notice, this idiot Vindman, traitor as far as I'm concerned, when he was testifying, he said the president was going against U.S. foreign policy. He actually said that in the impeachment hearing.
I remember
now,
that.
The president cannot go against U.S. foreign policy because he is, by Constitution, U.S. foreign policy. So that gives it away right there. These people, you think about it, they now are concerned about that Salvadoran, that they made a mistake and they deported the guy, Brego Garcia, I think his name is.
Yes.
So they all care about this guy, right? What did they care about the 10 million or plus, who knows how many, illegal entries into the United States? They didn't let it happen. They made it happen. That was a purposeful policy executed by whoever was running the Biden regime, because we now know it wasn't Joe Biden. We knew that anyway, those of us that paid attention. And so where was their concern for law? So these people, when they're in power, they use the law as a weapon. They violate it. They abuse power to attack their political opponents. And when they're out of power, which they didn't expect to be, then they hide behind the law. They don't care anything about the law. What you have to understand about these people is anything goes. The end justifies the means. These are totalitarians, and they're trying to conquer us. They're trying to take away our freedom. And the problem on our side is we don't have enough people that understand that, and we are divided. All the different countries we're talking about, we're all part of one defending liberty. And of course, the key is the United States. And I think that the Republicans, you mentioned the rhinos, I think that most of them seem to get it, because to get that bill that they passed last week on Thursday, to get that thing passed with that slim majority, the only way that can happen is if those Republicans realize, hey, we're fighting an implacable, united enemy. This is what Trump called the enemy within. I wrote an op-ed about it last year, the enemy within, and it really is. And the real battle is internal. The United States can defeat China, Iran, no problem. But the problem that we have is the internal subversion in the United States that's led by the Democrat Party. Because the rhinos are less likely. My concern right now is that the Republican senators have too much concern about spending. I wouldn't worry about it. Plus the fact they and I was talking to a Fox business host last night, just by pure coincidence. We were sitting next to each other at an event. And I said, I and Fergus and I have had this conversation. I believe in balanced budget. You shouldn't deficit spend. But now that's secondary. If we don't defeat this totalitarian enemy right now, and I hope those Republican senators don't become fixated, and don't forget this, that the analysis, the Congressional Budget Office is pure garbage. They only do static analysis. They don't do dynamic analysis. And it's already been proven. What Trump is trying to do is going to stimulate the economy. So the numbers they're making are not even real. And if our senators get stuck on these absurd projections, the way they call it, they score things, we're going to be in serious trouble. We need that bill, and then we need Trump to concentrate on those FBI investigations, They got to
Yes.
change the way the State Department works. I don't see any of that happening. And if it after that bill passes, they better get right on digging out these totalitarians, these traitors that we have in the U.S. federal bureaucracy. Get them the hell out of there, and let's take back the United States for the people. And this is going to help all the other countries that we're talking about.
I agree.
And that, Fergus, that's something that we covered this week in Gateway Hispanic. Senator Ron Johnson said, don't count on me. He's a Republican, right? And he said, I'm not going to vote yes on that bill. And he was mentioning, Steve, exactly what you're saying. It's the deficit. This is going to increase the deficit. But I agree. We need to stay united, because they do stay united even for the worst causes, like opening border, killing millions of innocent babies in the mother wombs, and letting criminals and cartels destroy our nations. Fergus, I have a question for you. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in Australia and New Zealand. We always heard, unfortunately, bad news about these progressive policies hitting the citizens down there. What is going on, and how do New Zealand's people from New Zealand or Australians see what's happening in the United States? Are they being completely shut down by progressive media as well?
Okay, so great question, Maria. So I'm glad to speak about the Anglosphere, or the British Commonwealth nations. We have a similar challenge in those nations where the power centers have been captured by people who have basically an anti-Western civilization or anti-American worldview, and they're very aggressive. They're assertive. Now that they're in power, they are using it, and obviously they're impeding Trump. Now, the big challenge in the Anglosphere nations is that they don't have such an independent intellectual or media class to resist, right? So in New Zealand, we have no private universities. All of them are public. In Australia, there might be one or two private universities. There's a very limited independent intellectual class. Whereas in the United States, we have a wonderful independent media, which of course you're a part of, and we have more public intellectuals who are not being paid at the taxpayer's expense, right? So they're more free to speak their mind or challenge the expansion of government. And so that is why, I mean, in Australia, there was obviously a recent victory to the leftist or left-leaning party. And much like in Canada, you think, how bad does it have to get?
Absolutely.
Before people will go back. And that's why the Western Canadians, the Prairie Canadians, the Heartlanders are saying, we got to get out of this. This is, it's already too bad for us. We cannot take it anymore.
Horrible, Willie, because that's what I was saying. What are all these people going to go? They're going to end up being asylees in the United States, just like South African farmers. It's really horrible. And then that's another thing. That's another level of opposition. What these Democrat lawmakers, Fergus, are doing to our law enforcement, to the point where they're like even resisting, and they're entering detention center. They're like hitting our law officers. So that's the craziest example. Lawmakers hitting our ICE officers at the detention center because they need to complete their oversight.
It is ridiculous. I think that obviously they have the right to oversight, but there's a way to do it and there's a way not to do it. Obviously, the way they did it, they were not there for oversight; they were there for a show, and everybody knows that. Again, I was happy that the mayor got picked up and locked up, and the same thing. There's being charges brought against the other congresswoman. There all should have been processed, because it is ridiculous. You have to respect the rule of law. Being somebody in Congress doesn't give you the right to do things the way you want to do whenever you want to do it. That's why we have process and we have rules and regulations to follow. The issue is that they don't care. Like Steve was saying, it's like they really don't care. They don't care about the law. They don't care about the process, especially now that they're not in power.
Because they're used to be bailed out too.
Exactly. There was no. It was impunity. There's no consequences to it. We talked about it. We went through 4 years of a government that we have no idea. No, well, we that talked about this all the time knew that we didn't have a president that was functioning. Somebody else was running the country. Now we actually can confirm it. We can see it. There's all kinds of evidence to that. And after all that, what happened? Absolutely nothing. I think that now, after we go through the process of passing this big, beautiful bill, like the president calls it, I agree with Steve. We need to get into that and stop it and prosecute these people, get rid of them. Otherwise, you're going to lose the country.
Absolutely.
That's just the way that's just the way it is.
Yeah,
it's being a real. Go ahead, Fergus. Sorry.
No, the truth too is that the Donald Trump administration has barely scratched the surface of the illegal immigrant population in the United States. So if they're throwing a tantrum at this and wait until there's some serious deportations, right? So I just think that the scale of the problem has not been addressed yet.
No. And the whole thing about immigration, how these 20 million people came in 4 years, was perfectly planned. This thing was not just a coincidence. This was perfectly planned because they wanted to change demographically all the big cities in the country and just become a one state, one party rule in the United States. The next move was going to be to give him the right to vote right away. So this was planned. This was not a coincidence. It's like no country will do that. But just open up your borders to everybody to come in without any process. Just give you a little note, come into court in 7 years from now. It's just ridiculous.
Not only that, Willie, it didn't only happen to the United States. I just came back, Steve, from Peru, and these people are having the worst security crisis since the Tren de Aragua and the Venezuelan migration arrived. 1 million Venezuelans in 1 year for a country that has more than approximately 30 million people. They destroyed the entire country. They also copy all these. Now the Peruvian mafia and the Colombia cartels are copying all the Tren de Aragua techniques to kidnap people, to commit crimes, to force the country to basically surrender. And they're doing that because, like Guatemala, Steve, Peru was one of the few countries that was resisting communism.
Exactly. The issue here is that this is all happening from within the U.S. State Department. That's the key. That's what we were talking about with Guatemala before. They didn't become an opposition. They controlled. The United States State Department took over Guatemala. It helped Castillo get in Peru. It helped Lula. Yeah. Actually, without the United States, Lula would never have won that election. And these are not by coincidence. These countries like Lula, he's one of Xi Jinping's big allies, wants to remove the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The United States is helping this guy. The United States is helping China take over Latin America. That's what people don't understand. We have internal subversion in the United States. And if we don't deal with that, and I don't see any signs that we're dealing with that. I don't know what they plan to do, what Trump plans to do with the State Department, but it doesn't look to me at this moment that he's doing anything at all. In Guatemala, the Biden regime still runs Guatemala.
Horrible.
The ambassador and the DCM, who's even worse than the ambassador. These people are executing the Biden regime agenda in Guatemala. And it coincides, the same thing in Peru you're talking about. And this mass migration is an age-old Marxist tool that they destroy. They can't conquer you if they don't destroy you. And so they manage to fool enough people where they're purposely destroying societies. That's why they don't produce energy in the United States. That's why they fight fossil fuels. It has nothing to do with environmentalism. It has everything to do with economics. But they want to be able to blame it on their political opponents. And so if people are unaware, they can get away with this stuff. And that's the problem. We need more awareness.
Absolutely, Willie. I agree with the conclusions. And I don't know if you have anything to add, Willie, but it's been a real pleasure to have you, Steve, Fergus. I think it's very valuable what you bring to this show and also in your media outlet, because I think Hispanics need to be more aware of what's happening, because they don't know who are they fighting. And Steve summarized it. They're fighting the U.S. State Department. They're fighting the elite. even Europeans. But Fergus, I don't count on European citizens. I think they're too busy going to the beach, enjoying their welfare system, and I have zero in common with a lot of young Europeans and even adults who don't even understand what's going on, and they're fine with whatever regulation and whatever persecution they suffer because they're not that bad yet.
Well, like Ronald Reagan said, liberty is only one generation away from extinction.
Amen.
I agree. And I think my last word will be that it needs to be a considered investment made in show of this type and conversation like this that can actually inform people and educate communities into like what is going on and what could be their future. I think the lack of that, of these types of forums so we can sit down and talk and discuss issues from the real perspective and educate people is something that is going to help in the future. Right now, that's being managed by the left and is really, really well funded, but that big investment needs to be done in media outlets like this and others that we participate every day to make sure that those changes, that we can protect the democracy we live in today.
Agree.
I agree completely with that. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and it's a great show, and enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. Fergus, last word, comments?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. And I agree that we really do lack a real conservative media, let's say, sphere in the Hispanic world. And you're working diligently to create that. I also would like to see all funding of public media cut or removed entirely, because they're just, it's like an anti-media or anti-journalism. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Steve, Fergus, Willie. Looking forward to seeing you next week, Willie. And if you want to contribute, Fergus, we're always reading your articles. We want to put it out for the Hispanic community. I think we need to educate our people more so we create some resistance to this elite that are destroying our family, our country, and our means of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Maria.
Willie and Maria. Cheers.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Willie.
Bye.
Bye.
Hoy celebramos un hito importante. Gateway Hispanic sigue creciendo y desde hace más de 7 meses nuestro equipo de profesionales trabaja incansablemente para brindarte información precisa y relevante sobre la actualidad de Estados Unidos y el mundo. Te invitamos a seguirnos y a formar parte de esta comunidad. Juntos podemos construir un futuro mejor informado. Agradecemos su confianza y apoyo. Gracias por formar parte de Gateway Hispanic.